The Galactic Coalition had been broadcasting the same message for 3 days straight across every star system, every trading post, every inhabited world from the core systems to the outer rim. The words echoed through space stations and planetary communication networks with mechanical precision. The human homeworld has fallen. Earth's defense grid lies in ruins. The war criminals of Sol System have been brought to justice at last. Admiral Velkin of the Hegemony Fleet stood on the bridge of his massive dreadnought, watching the celebration feed streaming in from dozens of worlds. His forearms moved across the control surfaces with practiced ease, while his compound eyes tracked the various displays showing victory parades, ceremonial fireworks, and jubilant crowds across the galaxy. The satisfaction that filled his chest was complete and warming. For too long, the humans had been the Coalition's greatest source of embarrassment and frustration. They were supposed to be a minor species, barely worth notice when first contact had been made 40 years ago. They should have fallen into line like all the others, accepted their place in the galactic hierarchy, paid their tribute, and been grateful for the protection and guidance of their betters. Instead, they had fought back when the Coalition had demanded tribute in the form of raw materials and manufactured goods. The humans had politely declined. When Coalition enforcement fleets had arrived to collect what was owed, the humans had destroyed them. When the Coalition had attempted to establish administrative control over human colonies, those colonies had simply vanished into the void, their populations disappearing like ghosts. The final insult had come when human raiders had struck deep into Coalition space, liberating 3 entire slave worlds and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The freed populations had been relocated to unknown destinations beyond the reach of Coalition justice. It was unthinkable. It was unprecedented. It was unforgivable. But now it was over. The orbital bombardment of Earth had been thorough and merciless. Every major city had been reduced to radioactive ash. The planet's defense satellites had been swept away like toys. The mighty space elevators that had been humanity's pride had collapsed into burning wreckage. The blue oceans had boiled away under the sustained bombardment, leaving behind a dead, scorched rock. Captain Kim Tae-young had been aboard the mining vessel Iron Will, working the asteroid fields beyond Neptune when the news reached them. He stood in the ship's common area, watching the feeds with the other survivors. His wife Choi Mina sat beside him, holding their 5-year-old daughter Hannah close. Round them, other families from the outer system mining operations watched in stunned silence as their homeworld burned. The Coalition forces had been systematic in their hunt. One by one, the human colonies had been located and destroyed. The agricultural worlds that fed the outer settlements were bombarded until nothing remained but glass and ash. The manufacturing centers that built human ships were targeted with precision strikes that left vast craters where cities once stood. The research stations that had unlocked humanity's technological advances were vaporized from orbit. Park Ji-hoon, ship's chief engineer, sat alone in the corner of the common area. His hands were steady as he watched the destruction, but his eyes held a cold fire that seemed to burn deeper with each passing hour. He had lost his wife and 2 sons on the Mars colony. They had been visiting his wife's family when the Coalition fleet arrived. The bombardment had been swift and complete. The last human transmission had come from a research station on the edge of the Kuiper Belt. The message was simple and haunting. Remember us? Then silence had fallen across human space like a shroud. For 72 hours, the Coalition celebrated. Trade routes that had been closed during the human conflict reopened. The minor species that had been inspired by human defiance quickly fell back into line, their brief dreams of freedom crushed along with Earth's cities. Tribute fleets resumed their routes. The natural order was restored. Supreme Counselor Vex Thera herself had given a speech from the Coalition capital, her serpentine form draped in ceremonial robes as she declared a new era of peace and prosperity. The humans, she proclaimed, had been a cancer on the galactic body politic. Their destruction was not just a victory for the Coalition, but for civilization itself. The celebration continued for 3 full days. There were parades on 100 worlds. The Coalition's various species competed to show their loyalty through increasingly elaborate displays of joy at humanity's destruction. Children who had never heard of humans before were taught to cheer at the mention of their defeat. But on the third day, something changed. It began with the deep space monitoring stations. Sensors that had been tracking debris from the battle started reporting anomalies. Objects that should have been dead, chunks of metal and ice were moving with purpose. They maintained formation. They adjusted course. They responded to gravitational changes in ways that debris simply could not. Captain Ilanara of the Coalition patrol vessel Inevitable Truth was conducting routine cleanup operations when her sensor operator reported the first impossible readings. What appeared to be wreckage from human ships was maintaining precise spacing and trajectory as it moved through the outer system. At first, she dismissed it as sensor error. Equipment malfunctioned. Space was vast and empty, full of strange phenomena that could fool even the most sophisticated instruments. But as the hours passed, the readings became undeniable. The debris was moving in formation. The debris was under intelligent control. The debris was not debris at all. Captain Yelanara of the Coalition patrol vessel, Inevitable Truth had been tracking what her sensors registered as debris for 6 hours when everything changed. The chunks of twisted metal and ice that floated through the outer system had seemed completely normal at first. Standard cleanup duty after a major battle. Nothing more than space junk waiting to be cataloged and disposed of. But debris did not move in perfect formation. Sensor operator Telvin run another full-spectrum analysis on those objects. She ordered her 4 arms dancing across the bridge controls with growing unease. Her crew worked around her with practiced efficiency, but she could sense their growing tension. The bridge of the Inevitable Truth housed representatives from 3 different coalition species, and all of them were beginning to show signs of nervousness. Captain Telvin's voice carried a tremor that made Yelanara's chitin crawl. The readings are impossible. These objects are maintaining exact spacing of 200 meters between each unit. They are adjusting their trajectory in response to gravitational changes. This cannot be debris. Yelanara's primary eyes focused on the tactical display, while her secondary eyes monitored the crew reactions. The objects on the screen moved with a purpose that defied explanation. They had been drifting for days, looking like nothing more than the scattered remains of destroyed human vessels. But now, they were accelerating, their formations spreading like the fingers of some vast, invisible hand. Magnify the image, she commanded. The main view screen filled with what should have been impossible. The objects were not debris at all. They were ships. Sleek, angular vessels, unlike anything in the Coalition's extensive database of known spacecraft designs. Their hulls were matte black, seeming to absorb light and sensor pings like hungry shadows. They moved through space with a fluid grace. That made Yelanara think of predators stalking through dark water. Unknown vessels, she broadcast on all frequencies. You are in violation of Coalition space. Identify yourselves immediately, or be destroyed. The response came not in words but in action. The dark ships suddenly accelerated beyond anything the Coalition had ever recorded. Their formations spread wider, individual vessels peeling away. From the main group with movements so coordinated, they seemed like parts of a single organism. Yelanara watched in growing horror as her instruments struggled to track their impossible velocities. All stations prepare for defensive maneuvers, she ordered, but even as the words left her speaking organs, she knew it was too late. The hull of the Inevitable Truth began to vibrate with a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The bridge lights flickered as power systems strained under some unknown interference. Through the view screen, Yelanara could see the dark ships closing distance at speeds that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. Captain, their approach vector suggests hostile intent, reported her tactical officer. Should we open fire? Before Yelanara could respond, her communications array exploded in a shower of sparks. The bridge filled with acrid smoke as backup systems struggled to come online. Through the chaos, she could hear the sound of her hull being torn apart by weapons that cut through. Coalition shielding like it was made of paper. The transmission ended in static. 3 systems away, Captain Nextrel of the heavy cruiser Dominant. Forrest was conducting a routine patrol when his sensor operator reported similar anomalies. Objects that had been classified as battle debris were suddenly moving with purpose and intelligence. Before he could react, dark shapes emerged from the sensor shadows, their weapons reaching out across impossible distances. His last transmission was a fragmentary warning: unknown human vessels, impossible weapons, ... The message cut off abruptly. Across the galaxy, similar encounters began occurring with increasing frequency. Coalition patrol fleets vanished without a trace. Monitoring stations that had operated flawlessly for centuries went dark in the space of minutes. Merchant vessels reported being shadowed by dark shapes that appeared on sensors for moments before disappearing again. The few scattered reports that made it through too. Coalition High Command told the same impossible story. Ships that moved like living things, weapons that ignored known physics, and most disturbing of all, vessels that bore the distinctive angular markings of human military design. But the humans were extinct. Every world had been confirmed destroyed. Every ship had been accounted for and eliminated. The species had been wiped from the galaxy with scientific precision. Admiral Velkin stood in his command center, reviewing the fragmentary reports with growing unease. The tactical displays showed a pattern that made no sense. The attacks were not random. They were coordinated, systematic, and executed with a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded even coalition military doctrine. "Sir," his intelligence officer approached with obvious reluctance. "We have analyzed the weapon signatures from the surviving sensor logs. Technology is ... unprecedented. Power levels beyond anything we have encountered. The energy patterns suggest they are drawing power from sources we cannot identify." Velkin studied the reports in silence. 17 patrol fleets had vanished in the past week. 43 monitoring stations had gone dark. 2 sector command posts had stopped responding to communications. The attacks were spreading, moving inward from the galaxy's edge, like a plague. "What about the ship designs?" he asked. "Confirmed human in origin, but modified beyond recognition." "Sir, the vessels are larger than anything humans previously constructed. Our estimates suggest individual ships with crew complements in the thousands." Velkin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of his command center. The humans they had fought and defeated had never operated vessels larger than destroyers. Their entire fleet had been composed of small, fast ships that relied on hit-and-run tactics. These new ships were something else entirely. The emergency session of the Coalition High Command convened in the crystal spires of Arcturus Station with an urgency that had not been seen in over a century. Representatives from every major coalition species materialized as shimmering holograms around the massive circular chamber, their various forms of agitation creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that echoed through the crystalline walls. Admiral Velkin materialized at the center of the chamber, his usual composure completely shattered. His forearms moved nervously across his uniform as he addressed the assembled leaders, his compound eyes reflecting the panic that gripped the coalition's military leadership. "The situation has moved beyond unprecedented," he began, his voice carrying across the chamber through a dozen different translation systems. "In the past 7 days, we have lost contact with 17 patrol fleets, 43 deep space monitoring stations, and 2 sector command posts. The attacks are coordinated, simultaneous, and executed with tactical precision that exceeds our current military capabilities." Supreme Counselor Vexathera coiled her serpentine form in obvious agitation, her scales shifting through colors that indicated extreme distress. "This is impossible," she declared, her voice rising to a shriek that made several representatives flinch. "We personally confirmed the destruction of every human world. We tracked their ships, their populations, their entire industrial capacity. The species is extinct. We made certain of it." "Then perhaps you can explain this," Velkin replied, activating the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. The collected sensor data from dozens of encounters played out in 3-dimensional detail, showing the dark ships as they moved across the star map like a spreading plague. The assembled leaders, watched in stunned silence as the tactical display revealed the full scope of the threat. The mysterious vessels were not moving randomly. They were following a carefully planned pattern, their trajectories forming a web that slowly but inexorably surrounded every major coalition world. "The ships are of human design," reported intelligence. Director Quintal, his multiple eyes blinking in rapid sequence as he processed the data streams. "But they are wrong in every conceivable way. The power signatures are beyond anything humans previously demonstrated. The materials used in their construction do not match any known alloy in our databases. And the numbers... ... He paused, his voice catching as his translation systems struggled with the magnitude of the concept. "Our current estimates suggest a fleet of between 8,000 and 12,000 vessels." 12,000 ships? Vexethra's voice cracked with disbelief. The entire human fleet at the height of their resistance never exceeded 400 vessels.
Where did they find the resources?
"To build such a force, there is more," Quintal continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Our deep space sensor arrays have detected massive energy signatures in the void between star systems. Something is out there, hiding in the darkness where no sane species would attempt to build anything. Multiple somethings. The gravitational anomalies suggest artificial structures of unprecedented size." The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. The implications of what they were hearing settled over the assembled leaders like a suffocating blanket. The humans they had fought and defeated were gone, but something else had taken their place. Something that had spent the years since Earth's destruction preparing for this moment. "They are not trying to retake their lost territory," Velkin realized aloud, his mandibles clicking with dawning horror. "They are not interested in conquest or reclaiming their colonies. They are positioning themselves for something else entirely." Before anyone could respond to this observation, every communication array in the station suddenly activated simultaneously. The massive display screens that lined the chamber walls flickered and changed, showing the same image on every surface. A human face filled the screens, scarred and weathered by years of hardship, but with eyes that held the cold light of distant stars. The human appeared to be standing on the bridge of a vessel that stretched beyond the edges of the transmission. Behind him, figures moved with military precision through corridors that seemed to extend impossibly far into the distance. The technology visible in the background was unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. "People of the Coalition," the human said, his voice carrying across the chamber with perfect clarity. The translation systems rendered his words into dozens of languages simultaneously, but the tone needed no translation. It was the voice of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You celebrated our fall. You danced on the graves of our children. You believed that the story was over when you watched our worlds burn." The human smile was the expression of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "My name is Park Jahoon," he continued, his scarred face filling every screen in the chamber. "I was a colony engineer when your forces found our settlement on Kepler 44 to be. I watched you burn our homes from orbit. I held my son Lee Minho as he died from radiation poisoning. I buried my wife Song Yuna in the radioactive ash of what had been our new world." The Coalition leaders watched in horrified fascination as Park walked across his bridge, passing massive displays that showed detailed information about Coalition fleet positions, defensive installations, and population centers. Every secret base, every hidden facility, every supposedly secure location was marked and cataloged with terrifying precision. "You made one critical error in your calculations," Park said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You assumed that we were all conveniently located on the worlds you found and destroyed. You never stopped to wonder why a species that had mastered faster than light travel would keep all their people in such easily targeted locations." The displays behind him shifted, showing the apparently empty void between star systems. Had appeared to be lifeless space now revealed itself as anything but empty. Massive artificial structures hung in the darkness, constructs that dwarfed anything the Coalition had ever attempted to build. "The story," Park said, his smile widening, "is just beginning. The human, calling himself Admiral Park Ji-hoon, spoke to the galaxy with the patience of someone who had been planning this moment for over 2 decades. His voice carried across every communication system in Coalition space, from the smallest outpost to the grandest capital worlds. Behind him, the bridge of his vessel stretched beyond the edges of the transmission, filled with figures moving with the precision of a military force that had been preparing for war for years. 23 years ago, I was a simple colony engineer, Park began, his scarred face calm and controlled. My wife Song Yuna was a teacher. My son Lee Min-ho was 7 years old and fascinated by the stars. We lived on a small agricultural world called New Haven, where we grew food for the outer colonies and raised our children in peace. The Coalition Council watched in horrified fascination as Park walked across his bridge, passing massive displays that showed detailed tactical information about their fleet positions, defensive installations, and population centers. Every secret base, every hidden facility, every supposedly secure location was marked and cataloged with terrifying precision. When your forces arrived at New Haven, we had no weapons, Park continued, his voice steady despite the pain that flickered across his features. We were farmers and teachers and engineers. We'd built schools and hospitals and libraries. Thought that would be enough to show you that we were not a threat. The displays behind him shifted, showing footage from the attack on New Haven. Coalition ships hung in space like dark angels of death, their weapons reaching down to touch the planet's surface. Cities disappeared in flashes of light. Forests burned. Rivers boiled away. "Why'd you burn our settlements from orbit?" Park said, his voice never changing from its conversational tone. "I held my son as he died from radiation poisoning in a shelter that could not protect him from your weapons. I buried my wife in the ash of what had been our garden, where she had taught children about the beauty of growing things." Supreme Counselor Vexera tried to interrupt, her serpentine form coiling with agitation. "We offered you terms. You could have surrendered. You could have accepted your place in the Galactic Order." Park's smile was cold and patient. "You offered us terms. Slavery. Tribute. The right to exist only as long as we served your needs. But you made one critical error in your calculations." The displays around him changed again, showing what appeared to be empty space. The void between. Star systems that most species avoided because it was too dangerous and too expensive to colonize. But as the images focused and enhanced, the truth became clear. The darkness was not empty. "You assumed that we were all conveniently located on the worlds you found and destroyed," Park explained. "You never stopped to wonder why a species that had mastered faster than light travel would keep all their people in such easily targeted locations. You never asked yourself where the mining ships went when they disappeared. You never wondered about the deep space construction projects that vanished from your sensors." The void between stars revealed its secrets. Massive artificial structures, hung in the darkness, constructs that dwarfed anything the Coalition had ever attempted to build. Cities that existed in the emptiness between worlds, powered by technologies that should not have been possible. Manufacturing facilities that stretched for thousands of kilometers, or surfaces covered with the angular shapes of human warships. "We have been out here for 23 years, Park said, gesturing to the displays that showed the scope of human civilization hidden in the darkness. "Building, planning, preparing. Every refugee ship that escaped your purges found its way to us. Every mining station you overlooked became a foundation for something larger. Every supposedly dead world that you did not bother to check twice became a resource extraction point." Intelligence Director Quintel's multiple eyes blinked in rapid sequence as he processed what he was seeing. The energy requirements alone would be impossible. No species has ever attempted to build on such a scale in deep space. "You are correct," Park replied, apparently hearing the transmission across the light years. "No species has ever attempted it, but then no species has ever had the motivation that you gave us. You see, when you make it personal, when you target families, when you celebrate the deaths of children, you do not just make enemies." The displays shifted again, showing the human fleet in all its terrible glory. Thousands of vessels moved through space with perfect coordination, their dark holes reflecting no light. They were larger than anything humans had previously built. their weapons reaching across distances that should have been impossible. You make survivors with nothing left to lose, Park continued. And survivors are the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, because they have already lost everything that mattered to them. They have nothing left to protect except the memory of what was taken from them. The tactical displays updated in real time, showing Coalition defensive positions being systematically dismantled. Not destroyed with the crude violence of orbital bombardment, but carefully taken apart with surgical precision. Military targets were eliminated while civilian infrastructure remained untouched. You wanted to know how we built this fleet? Park asked, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. Every refugee who escaped your hunt brought skills and knowledge. Every engineer who watched his world burn became motivated to build something that could never be destroyed.
Ow.
Every parent who buried their children became determined to ensure that no other parent would face the same choice. He leaned forward, his scarred face filling the screen. They all had one thing in common. They all remembered what you did to Earth. They all remembered what you did to their families. And they all wanted to make sure that you could never do it again. The transmission flickered, showing text scrolling across every screen in Coalition space. Surrender unconditionally within 72 hours. Or we will demonstrate why humanity earned the title Death Worlders. The screens went dark, leaving the Coalition. Leaders alone with the knowledge that they had created something far worse than the enemy they had destroyed. The Coalition's response to the human ultimatum was swift and predictable. Every available fleet was mobilized within hours. Planetary defense systems that had remained dormant for decades roared to life. Emergency conscription orders went out to every member species, calling up reserves that had never expected to see combat. What they discovered was that 23 years of preparation had advantages that went far beyond simply building more ships. Admiral Velkin stood in the command center of the Coalition's most powerful dreadnought, the Eternal Dominion, watching his carefully organized fleet formation disintegrate in real time. The tactical display showed a nightmare scenario that no military academy had ever prepared him for. The human vessels moved through space like they owned it, their weapons reaching across distances that should have been impossible, their shields absorbing direct hits from weapons that could crack planets. How are they doing this? He demanded of his tactical officer, his forearms gripping the command rail so tightly that his chitin began to crack. Sir, their power signatures are beyond our understanding. The officer replied, his voice shaking with confusion and fear. The energy readings suggest they are drawing power from the vacuum of space itself. Our computers cannot even calculate how such technology would function. What the Coalition did not know was that humanity's greatest strength had never been their individual courage or their advanced technology. It had been their ability to adapt, to learn, to take the best of what they encountered and make it uniquely their own, in the void between stars. During their long years of exile and preparation, they had found things. Ancient ruins left behind by species that had transcended physical existence millions of years ago, derelict ships from civilizations that had learned to harness the fundamental forces of reality before disappearing into dimensions beyond normal space, technologies that the Coalition had deemed too dangerous or impossible and had locked away in secured vaults. Humanity had no such restrictions. They had no governing council to debate ethics. They had no ancient traditions that forbade certain types of research. They had only the burning need to ensure that what had happened to Earth could never happen again. Captain Songmyra stood on the bridge of the human vessel Remembrance, watching Coalition ships flee before her advance. She had been a child when New Haven burned, old enough to remember her mother's garden, but too young to understand why the sky had turned to fire. Now, as she commanded one of humanity's most powerful warships, she felt the weight of every life that had been lost in the Coalition's purges. Target their command ship, she ordered, her voice calm despite the magnitude of the moment. Disable their weapons, but leave their life support intact. We are not here to commit genocide. The battle for Arcturus Station lasted exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes. When it ended, the Coalition's primary command structure had been captured, intact, their leaders taken alive as Admiral Park had promised. The human fleet surrounded every major coalition world, their ships hanging in space like dark angels of judgment. But the real revelation came when the coalition's surviving leaders were brought before Admiral Park aboard his flagship. The vessel's interior was a monument to human adaptability and determination. Corridors that seemed to bend space itself to contain impossible distances. Gravity that flowed like water, allowing movement in directions that should not have existed. And at the center of it all, a command chamber that appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Supreme Counselor Vexthera could barely maintain her composure as she was escorted into the chamber. Her serpentine form trembled as she tried to process what she was seeing. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "These technologies are myths, legends. The precursor races that built these things ascended beyond physical reality millions of years ago." Park nodded slowly, his scarred face showing no emotion. "They did ascend, but they left their tools behind. And unlike you, we were not too afraid to use them. We had nothing left to lose, so we were willing to risk everything to gain the power we needed." Admiral Velkin stepped forward, his mandibles clicking with desperate authority. "What do you want from us? Territory? Resources? Tribute? We can negotiate terms that will satisfy both our peoples. What do we want?" Park repeated, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "We want justice, want to ensure that no species ever again faces extinction for the crime of refusing to kneel. We want to build a galaxy where children can grow up without fearing that their worlds will burn because they were born to the wrong species." He activated a display that showed Earth, but not the dead world the Coalition had left behind. This was Earth as it had been before the bombardment. Green continents, blue oceans, white clouds swirling in patterns that spoke of a living world. "We have learned to unmake planets," Park said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "And we have learned to remake them. We can restore what was destroyed, or we can ensure that nothing will ever grow again in the places where you built your empire." The display shifted, showing the Coalition's capital worlds. Beautiful cities, sprawling agricultural zones, billions of beings living their lives in peace. And then it showed what those worlds would look like if human technology turned its attention to destruction rather than creation. "The choice is yours," Park continued. "Accept our terms and live free, or refuse and discover what happens when you back a species with nothing left to lose into a corner, where they have no choice but to fight for the future of every living thing in the galaxy." The Coalition surrendered. Within the hour, their leaders signing documents that dissolved their empire and freed every enslaved species. As the human fleet began its long journey home, Admiral Park stood on his bridge and thought of his son Lee Minho, who would never see the stars again, but whose memory would ensure that the children of 1,000 worlds would see them free.